I'm so excited to be joined today by Congressman Tom Suozzi, New York's 3rd Congressional District's representative. Congressman, it's great to be here with you.
Aaron, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to finally meet you in person or like in person, air
In
quote.
person.
But I really, really appreciate the opportunity to come on your show.
So I want to jump right into it. A big topic of conversation right now is the House budget resolution that was passed last night, or at least the bill that was passed last night that allows the House GOP to kind of get this budget rolling. A lot of people are concerned about Medicaid and the future of Medicaid in America. Can you talk about the $800 billion cuts that were in the budget resolution, where things stand, and what people should know about that right now?
Yeah, there's so many cuts, not just the $800 billion in the area where Medicaid comes from, but SNAP cuts and science cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. And even with all those cuts, it doesn't add up to the $4.5 billion in deficit they're going to generate by doing the tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the country. So it's really nonsensical. We see all this stuff happening with Doge. It's not at all planned. It's all very chaotic. There's more money being spent on contracts for Elon Musk than they're actually identifying in cuts. And they're doing it in this very haphazard, chaotic way that probably violates the Constitution. And people are freaking out about it. So what's happening right now is that the fiscal year for the federal government goes until September 30th. So September 30th of 2024 is when the budget ended for 2024. And this fiscal year 2025 started the next day, the beginning of October. Well, they couldn't pass a budget, so we had to do what's called a continuing resolution. That expires on March 14th. What we're doing now is actually different than that. This is what they call the reconciliation bill, because to pass a budget, you've got to get the majority in Congress, and you have to also get 60 votes in the Senate. Under reconciliation, because of this weird thing in the law, you only have to get 50 votes in the Senate, just get a majority in the Senate. So we're in for a wild ride as they try to jam this thing through using the majority, doing my way or the highway, with these deficit increasing tax cuts, as well as cuts to very, very important vital programs that people rely on.
So is there anything that can be done right now between now and March 14th to prevent this, or rather to delay it? Or, I mean, maybe asking it in a different way, do Republicans have their own house in order right now to get it across the finish
Well,
line?
we have to think of the power that we have right now. Okay. What do we have the power to do? Well, we can legislate. Now, that's not easy to do because we're in the minority. We don't have the ability to put things on the floor unless we get 290 people to do it, which is hard to do because we only have 200 and something. You can't get 290. So legislating is not easy. Sometimes it works if the Republicans can't, as you said, get their act together. And they are fractured right now, and they will likely be fractured going forward. So legislation is one way. Two is litigation. These are all the outside groups that we're working together with that are suing the administration on different things. And number three, and really the most important thing for your viewers probably, is to mobilize people. We've got to get people activated because the more the Republican members of Congress hear from their constituents about how these cuts are going to affect their lives, the more that they're going to be less likely to support some of the crazy stuff that these guys are proposing. So we've seen a few members of Congress, Republicans, come out and say, hey, you can't get rid of the Department of Education without going through the Congress. That's pursuant to the Constitution. You've had other people say, the law is the law. You have to follow the law. And you can't do this without the Congress voting on it. There's other people who have said, we don't like this particular cut. Some Republicans came out and blocked cuts that they made to the 9/11 healthcare programs. And there's been other crazy stuff that's happened. They, for example, fired the people who were responsible for overseeing the nuclear stockpiles. They're like, oh, that was a mistake. And they try to hire them back, but they didn't have their email addresses because they'd all been kicked off of the government email. So that's a screw up. They fired the people who work in the IRS, 6,000 employees who work at the IRS in the middle of tax season, when they had told them earlier, you can't take the early buyout that Musk is offering with Doge because we need you during tax season. Then they fired them. Then some people took the early buyout and then they got a layoff notice. So is this always, you have this avian flu and you have the measles outbreak, and they fired the employees that are responsible for overseeing measles and avian flu outbreaks. So it's kind of crazy what they're doing. It's kind of haphazard, and we have to mobilize people to point out how these cuts will affect their lives.
And I do want to shift gears a bit and talk about Ukraine. You're one of the only members of Congress who actually visited President Zelensky in Ukraine over the past several years since the war started. Couple of quick rapid fire questions before I get into something more detailed. Who started the war in Ukraine?
No brainer. Russia and Putin.
And is President Zelensky a dictator?
President Zelensky is not a dictator. Vladimir Putin is a dictator. Zelensky was elected by 73% of the vote in an election that was certified by the commission that oversees free and fair elections in Europe.
Now, on Friday, there's reporting that President Zelensky is coming to town to Washington, D.C. to meet with Donald Trump and sign a minerals deal. Can you talk about that minerals deal and where things stand in terms of the conflict right now?
I don't know all the details of the minerals deal yet, but this is kind of like, I mean, Trump is really bullying him right now because the Ukrainian people are much smaller than Russia. They are dependent on the United States of America to defend them, as we should be. As our ally, we should be working to help them every way we can. And if we abandon them and we reward Russia in this conflict, what are the other small countries that are allies of ours going to say? What's Lithuania going to say? What's Latvia going to say? What's Estonia going to say? What's Moldova going to say? What's Poland going to say? So he's bullying him. Now, do we need raw materials, rare earth minerals here in the United States of America? Yes, we do. Would it be good to have a relationship with Ukraine to supply those to us in the future? Yeah, it could be good for them, could be good for us. But one of the ways that the Republicans are trying to sell this is they're saying, oh, if Russia invades further in the future, we'll have more of an interest to protect our monetary interest, to protect the rare earth minerals. We've had all kinds of U.S. companies working in Ukraine for decades, and we didn't protect our ally like this, a democratically elected ally. And we're cozying up now with a dictator. It's such a mistake, the way that Trump is selling this thing, where he is cozying up with the authoritarian. But we got to keep on fighting, and we have to encourage those Republicans, those few Republicans, and there are more coming out of the woodwork, to say we must support our democratically elected ally.
Well, I think that was my next question was you are one of the main Democrats calling for bipartisanship and at least reaching across the aisle, working with Republicans where you can to help Americans and just help America's interests abroad. Is there any appetite right now within the Republican caucus to get more aid to Ukraine, to continue the support, or not really anymore?
No, there are people that realize this is an existential legacy defining moment for them, that they can't stand what Trump is doing. And they've spoken up about it. The guy named Joe Wilson has spoken up. Brian Fitzpatrick has spoken. These are Republicans. Don Bacon has spoken up. And there are more that hopefully will show the guts as time goes on, especially if they hear from their constituents, that will stand up. Now, listen, it's not easy to stand up against your own party. That's one of the things that's killing us in the Democratic Party sometimes, and it's killing them in the Republican Party. So it's killing the country, quite frankly, is people not showing the courage to stand up for what they know is right. We need to be encouraging those Republicans that do stand with Ukraine, which is most of them who voted for the bill to supply the funding, to stand up and recognize that what Trump is doing is antithetical to our whole history in this country. So we've got to encourage more of that.
Got it. And Congressman, to kind of finish off, a lot of Americans, especially on the Democratic side, are worried. They're saying, we don't think Democrats in Congress are doing enough to protect us right now. We don't see them fighting back against Trump or House leadership on the Republican side. What's your message to folks who think Democrats aren't doing enough? And what can they do on their end to fight back as well?
Well, we do have to fight back when necessary. Like this Ukraine case is a great example. This reconciliation budget is a great example. Cuts to Medicaid are a great example. Cuts to the Affordable Care Act are a great example. Some of the wanton, indiscriminate firings done by DOJ are a great example of people's personal information being looked at by 20-something-year-old hackers and gamers who are looking for their pot of gold in the corner, looking at people's information about the drugs they take or about the medicines, the problems that they have, or their bank accounts. That's wrong. We have to fight back against that. But we can't fight back against every single thing that Trump brings up every day, because if everything is a DEFCON 1, then nothing's DEFCON 1. So we have to recognize how to pick our fights. And we have to look for opportunities. What I try to do is I try to highlight Republicans that are fighting back against Trump. So I'm being bipartisan. I'm highlighting the Republicans, but I'm also pointing out that it's the Republicans that are saying that Trump is doing this wrong. And they're saying that about Ukraine, and they're saying about some of these other things that I've talked about. So the more that the public gets to their elected officials, especially the Republican elected officials, and said, we are concerned about what is happening, you need to represent us, the more likely we're going to be able to push back against this crazy, as they call it, muzzle velocity. This is the last thing I should make this very clear. They're consciously putting out dozens of things at once because their belief is, and they're right, is that the press and the public and people generally can only focus on one or two things at a time. And if they put out 10 things, let's say they screw up two of them, then they'll move on to the next thing and they'll put out another 10 things. So I always say it's like pickpockets. Pickpockets work in teams. One person comes in and bumps into you, and when you're bumped into and you're looking over this way, the other guy picks your pocket. So while we're all bumped in about Panama and Greenland and the Gulf of America and all this other stuff, we're all excited and getting upset, understandably so. They want to cut Medicaid. They want to try and do something to Social Security. They want to cut the important programs that affect people's lives in our district. So we have to stand up.
You heard it here first. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate you, man.
All right. Stopping.